Welcome to all of you and grand bienvenue à tout le monde. J'espère que tout le monde va bien. Vous êtes en bonne santé. Je sais que c'est un moment extrêmement dur pour tout le monde. Bon, so before we get started, I'm seeing lots of hellos coming in. I love this chat box for that. We're literally coast to coast with our attendees today. So big welcome to all of you. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations in this country, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work, to live, and to meet on this territory. On behalf of Business in the Arts, I am the CEO and President of Business in the Arts. I'm so pleased to be partnering with the NAC. Christopher Deacon, our CEO of the NAC, is here today to bring you this arts tracking report, which we're calling it, conducted by Nik Nanos with the Nanos Research, and here he is today. This report will give us a sense of how Canadians are feeling about going back to the arts, and will answer the challenging question of, if we open our doors, will they come? And obviously there are many challenges we are facing as we contemplate opening our doors and ensuring that people feel safe when we do that. These are important questions to ask, and I'm so glad that we were able to begin this call. We've had lots of calls with CEOs and chairs across the country and artistic directors. It was very clear that this kind of work was needed, and Christopher Deacon gave us a call and said, can we do something? And we got this going really quickly, and I need to thank our sponsors who helped finance all of this, beginning with the NAC. So big thank you to the NAC as our founding arts partner. Also to Woodbridge for their support, the Canadian Opera Company for their support, and also to our friend Raji and Christine Armstrong for your support. This will allow us to do at least 2 more tracking studies after this, so we can track the feelings of Canadians as we go forward about going back to the arts. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our partner in this, Christopher Deacon, to explain the context for this study. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nichole. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous, kwe kwe. The National Arts Centre is very pleased to be founding arts partner for the Arts Tracking Survey, which will provide insight to arts leaders, I meant to say insight, provide insight to arts leaders across Canada and inform their decisions. I want to thank NAC Foundation Director Christine Armstrong and her partner Irfan Raji for their support in making the survey possible. Thanks also to Nichole Anderson and Business for the Arts for partnering and directing this project with such skill. In April, the National Arts Centre was invited to participate in consumer research on a pay-to-play basis. The participating arts companies would chip in to have research done, and only those who paid would receive the results. That didn't match the NAC's goal to play a useful role in the performing arts community. So I asked Nichole if Business in the Arts would partner with us to commission research that would have 3 attributes. It would be national, it would be undertaken regularly to track trends over time, and all the findings would be made public, free to everyone. Nichole wisely proposed an advisory panel of arts leaders who provided input to shape the questions included, and she developed the process which brings us to today's publication of the first tranche of research findings. The pressing question on the minds of artists, producers, presenters, and institutions is, when will audiences return and museum visitors return, and what will it take to make them comfortable doing so? In a moment, Nik Nanos will walk us through the findings and explain the key insights. Each of us may perceive these findings differently. Those in small venues with flexible formats may see a lot of reason for hope. Larger format producers and institutions may see stiff challenges on the road to recovery. Both reactions are probably well-founded. For any of you struggling to see past the darkness of this moment, I want to point out a small but I thought important factor among the findings. With respect to both live performing arts events and museums, 99% of respondents say they're coming back. They love the arts and they won't be stopped from engaging with them live and in person. So I personally thought that was quite inspiring. However, of course, the question is when. The producers of large format events that require large gatherings, for those producers, the next 12 months will be challenging. It's important that we let funders and donors know that. These findings are national research, and as such, policymakers need to take these into account. I want to, before wrapping, just quickly signal two issues arising from these discussions: physical distancing and the digital opportunity. It's a widely held view, I think, that I share, that social gathering is fundamental to the performing arts. It's a communal experience. We gather, stories are shared, lessons are learned, sometimes tears are shed. I presume our colleagues who run museums would tell us that museums are essential to provide context for the art, an environment that is conducive to appreciating the art, and the tactile experience of standing a meter away from a statue or an exhibit. If I seem to be arguing against arts on a screen, I'm not actually. I think most arts leaders see screens as a gateway to in-person engagement, or an enhancement, or an alternative. The National Arts Center's initiative with #CanadaPerforms this spring in partnership with Facebook and others has clicked with Canadian audiences and artists. And there's abundant opportunity for those artists and institutions willing to pursue the question further. But speaking as just one member of a community that is working hard to engage people in live cultural experiences, I would encourage stakeholders, funders, government, and media to not position the live versus digital experiences as either-or questions that involve abandoning centuries of our experience sharing culture in person. I think the survey tells us that there are people wanting to engage in the arts in either in person or online. I'd like to now call on Nik Nanos to share with us his insight on the top line of the research.
Thanks, Christopher. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining the call today. And I would like to say, very good news is that the full report is on the Business in the Arts website. It should be there now. So if you want to grab the report, share the report, dig into the data, I would suggest that you get that, because the whole purpose of this initiative is basically to share information and insight as to what is going on. And what I want to do is basically do a bit of a walk through some key highlights of the study. I'm going to share my screen. So can someone give me a thumbs up that they can see my screen? Yes, Steve, thank you very much for the thumbs up. So, you know, the key thing to remember is that this is a benchmark and our first look at culture goers, what their motivators are, what they've been doing in the pandemic, what the conditions might be for them to return, the things that would make them comfortable, and basically to get a first glimpse. And as Nichole mentioned at the top of the, I'll call it the show, at the top of the webinar, this is just the first go, and we'll be unpacking this over the next couple months in order to get more insight and intelligence when it comes to what's happening and when people can expect to come back. You know, the interesting thing, and maybe one of the first things to ask is, what are culture goers doing right now? And the key finding from the study is that culture goers are still engaged. They're still interested in the arts. They're still trying to connect in the arts. And according to the survey that we just finished in the past month, 1 out of every 2 culture goers has actually watched a digital performance or virtual tour since the COVID-19 pandemic. And the other thing to remember when we're talking about culture goers throughout this whole study, what we're talking about are individuals in Canada who have reported participating in person at an arts and cultural event in the 12 months prior to this. So we're not talking about the general population, we're talking about individuals that are engaged in arts and culture. But the interesting twist is not necessarily that they're using digital as kind of like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say fix, but a short-term alternative to their culture and arts desire to be engaged. I think one of the things that was quite striking in the study is that when we asked culture goers about their willingness to pay, the vast majority are actually open to pay for that digital experience. About 9 out of every 10, only 1 out of every 10 said they're not willing to pay. But the interesting thing when we kind of parse out the numbers is about 50% can actually name a percentage of the full ticket price that they would be willing to pay for that same digital or virtual experience. And about 40% are unsure how much they would pay, but say that they would pay something. What does this mean? This means that there's probably an opportunity for the sector to provide leadership on this in terms of exploring digital as part of that kind of short-term experience at least. And you know, the other thing that we have to remember is that this particular study does not project into the future, but it basically reflects what culture goers are doing now. And what's very clear is that in the absence of being able to participate in person, they're turning to digital right now. Now, when we think about the potential conditions for returning, what we did was we unpacked indoor cultural activities, outdoor cultural activities, and museums and art galleries. And you know, what you can see here is that for indoor cultural activities, a full 1/4 of culture goers are ready from the get-go to come back to in-person arts and cultural events. And this would be, just the caveat here, this would be based on these events being allowed to happen by the government. And I guess actually that's probably one important thing to put on the table, that a lot of the views, I would say, are conditional on people's experiences of the day. And that's why when you look at the number, 35% are unsure when they're going to come back. The fact of the matter is that when we were doing the survey in May, there is still a significant amount of uncertainty. People didn't know when they'd be able to go back to work. They didn't know when things would open. And what we're probably looking at is over the next number of months, monitoring that unsure number as it goes down and seeing where people fall in terms of whether they immediately are ready to come back or whether they're prepared to wait. But the interesting takeaway when we look at what I'll say the immediate returners compared to those that want to wait is that for the immediate returners, the things that would make them comfortable related to immediately coming back have more to do with physical distancing and masks, while for those that are waiting, you can see that 44% said they would want a vaccine of some sort. That also means that discussions and deliberations related to the vaccine could be another, what I'll say, trigger point. That if a vaccine or what I'll say a health solution is advanced, which comes a little sooner than anticipated, that could accelerate people's return to indoor cultural activities. On the outdoor front, not a big surprise. You can see 39% or 4 out of every 10 culture goers are ready to come back to outdoor cultural activities. Similar numbers related to physical distancing and masks. Vaccine still important, but not as important compared to the indoor context. And then you still have that 1/3 that are still unsure when they're going to come back and just waiting to see how life in general will unfold when it comes to the transition. On the museum and gallery front, you can see still 1/3 are ready to come back immediately. You can see for those individuals that report coming back immediately for museums and galleries, physical distancing being a little more important for that particular segment of the sector compared to outdoor activities and also indoor cultural and arts activities. But same kind of thing. Those that want to wait, you can see 51% are waiting for of those are waiting for the vaccine. And you might also notice a little never. Actually, it's not never. It's in caps. Never. 1%. Actually, the key takeaway here is that when you look at the never for any of these, there's only about 1% or almost a rounding error. Not to diminish anyone that doesn't want to come back, but you can see everyone wants to come back. Some people are ready to come back immediately. There's another segment that are going to wait, and there's a significant proportion that are unsure. And the thing is that I would hazard to say that as people become more and more conditioned and comfortable to normalize in their regular lives, right? To go back to church, to go shopping like they used to shop, to socialize with their friends and neighbors, that I would expect that the level of comfort will definitely increase. This is my last slide. I think the 4 key points to take away from this first round of research is that culture goers are still very highly engaged, and that they want to remain connected to the arts, and they're seeking alternatives until that in-person option returns. Second of all, not only are they engaged, but they're ready. But a significant portion are basically ready as soon as it's possible to basically go back to that in-person experience. The other interesting thing is that they are motivated, and they're motivated, but what they want to see is how that experience will pan out in terms of reconciling public health priorities with what I'll say, that cultural experience that they crave. And the last bullet, and the most important, is that we have to consider these views fluid, because many people still are fundamentally unsure. They're unsure about their personal lives, they're unsure about their work lives, they're unsure how they're going to be reconnecting to their family and friends. So it really shouldn't be a big surprise that a number are unsure about their reconnection in person to the arts and cultural activities that they love. And with that, I'm going to pause, because actually I'm not here to listen to myself talk. I'm here to participate in the panel and the interesting discussion that we're going to have. So thanks everybody for paying attention while I do the quick walk through the numbers.
Thank you, Nik. That was terrific and very interesting and very encouraging to know that Canadians still love their arts. They're still engaging. I think we see this everywhere in our social media feeds, but it's good to have affirmation, confirmation that that is in fact happening right across Canada. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to a pretty terrific panel of respondents. We have leaders in the culture sector from coast to coast joining us today on the board side, CEO side, and I'd like to introduce them to you. And if I could, if everybody can see a mosaic like I can right now, where you have everybody's wonderful faces up. If I can, as I say your name and your title and which organization you represent, if you could just wave to the audience so they know who's speaking going forward. So I'm going to start with Kenji Maeda, our Executive Director of the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. Hello, Kenji. Cornell Wright, Chair of the National Ballet of Canada. Hello, Cornell. Anita Gaffney, Executive Director of the Stratford Festival. There she is. And Camilla Holland, Executive Director of the Manitoba Theatre Centre. And Frédéric Julien, Director of Research for CAPACOA, the Canadian Association of the Performing Arts, to be precise. And Steve Bellamy, CEO of the Confederation Centre for the Arts. And then we have Irfan Raji, Chair of the Glenbow Museum in Alberta. So hello, and thank you to all of you. We're going to hear your thoughts on how you feel about these findings, but we'd also like to hear from the participants who have joined us on this call. And as you can imagine, we have 750 participants on the call right now. So being able to answer all your questions is really impossible unless we spend 48 hours on this call. So Karan on our team, Karan Sahaidio, has come up with an opportunity for you to ask your questions, and in a democratic way, I think. And Karan, maybe you can just walk us through how this is going to work for our participants on the call.
Yeah, thanks, Nichole. Yes, so everyone, to ask a question, just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And from there, you can ask a question, and you can also vote on the questions you'd like answered by clicking on the thumbs up button. Since we have limited time, the 3 questions with the most votes will be answered on air by our panelists. And also, we also encourage you to chat about the findings on social media. And if you do that, use the hashtag #ArtStudy. So that's hashtag ARTSstudy.
Great, thank you, Karan. So I have my prepared questions that I'm going to propose to the panel and pose to the panel. And then at the end, we're going to leave enough time so that we can ask at least 3 of the questions coming through And we'll throw it over to Corinne to read out those 3 questions that were the most popular or had the most likes. We've never tried this before, so bear with us if it feels a bit messy, but we thought this might be the most democratic way to approach this. So as we think about these findings, and as governments begin to open their doors and ease restrictions and slowly allow some of our arts organizations to open, the big question facing arts leaders is, can we open our doors, practically speaking, financially, with those health restrictions in place that are required by governments? 1 in 4 Canadians would like to visit immediately. Should we open our doors today? But can we do it? What are the challenges, and what are you going through? So I'd like to start off with Camilla Holland, Executive Director of the Manitoba Theatre Centre, who I know is looking at this as we speak.
Great, thank you so much. So I expect that everybody on the call today has been speaking to your audience, and you know what the Nanos data is telling you as well, which is people fall on a spectrum. There's people who would be there tomorrow if you opened your doors, and there are people who are saying, stakeholders, love the people who adore your organization, who are saying they're going to wait for a vaccine. And what's so fantastic about this data, and my profound thanks to Business for the Arts and the National Arts Centre for leading the charge here, is we have a gauge on the national landscape and a benchmark to look at as things evolve. So here in Winnipeg, we have 9 active cases, and not a single Manitoban is currently hospitalized with coronavirus. So it's a very different experience than my colleagues are having in major cities around the country. And what that means to me is it's important for me to benchmark those Nanos national omnibus data against the lived experience of my audience. And so we've been modeling similar questions, and our audience as of last week said that they were willing to return just slightly earlier than that Canadian average, which was heartening. It's really great to think that we'll have an audience back in our building again. But here are some comments that also came from that survey that outline just a few of the challenges ahead. I think everybody should have to wear masks, except the actors. That would be weird. Or, I'd like to keep my seats, but I think you should probably not sell the seats next to me. Or, why don't you just run the shows for twice as long? Because then the audience could be spread out. We also had some wonderful comments from audiences saying, we get the complexities of this ahead, and we're just so thrilled that you're asking what will take for us to return. But what I think this highlights is that I still have panic attacks about how we can safely create art with actors who need to speak moistly on each other and aren't wearing masks and aren't 6 feet apart. We have protocols backstage that need to be established and likely evolve. And a really fundamental, how can we afford to produce shows at the scale and scope expected by our audience for a significantly smaller audience, either because of physical distancing or because of the reluctance to return? We've grown up as an institution with union agreements, fees determined by collective agreements, staffing requirement. These structures grew up based on a density in our audience. And for a company like MTC, what our large venue allows for, our unique value proposition in this market, is busy dressing rooms and large casts and quick costume changes with help from dressers and microphone packs placed by technicians and musicians practically sitting on top of each other in the orchestra pit. So I keep saying we're going to have to play the long game with this crisis, that once we figured out how to bring audiences safely into our venues and onto our stages, we're still going to have to figure out how to be sustained while those individuals who are waiting for a vaccine wait it out. We are going to have smaller audiences, and in MTC's case, correlating smaller donor bases for a few years, and that's going to be financially challenging for the years ahead.
Thank you. Very, very interesting, and obviously these are uncharted waters and challenging to navigate clearly. Cornell, chair of the National Ballet of Canada, which is a giant organization facing the giant venue. How do you feel about this question? Are you, if you could open your doors today, could you and would you?
Right at this moment, we would be in the midst of an incredible run of the restaged Swan Lake by Karen Kane. And so at the moment, it's you know, this is obviously not where we wanted to be this particular moment in time. I found the data that Nik produced to be heartening and consistent with our experience. You know, we've been we announced in April that we were canceling the remainder of our season, which would otherwise have ended in June, and we are due to be on the stage in November. And there's obviously a lot of uncertainty in the world in terms of what will be possible in the fall. But to be honest, we've been overwhelmed by the support of our audience members and patrons who have continued to buy subscriptions for next season, basically on the same track as normal, knowing there's some uncertainty, but all really saying to us that they're keen to support the company through, and the art generally through what is inherently a difficult period. For us, there are really two big gates. One is to have the rules lifted in a way that allows our artists to rehearse and be on stage. And we're not due to be on stage to November, so we have some period of time for that to happen. And obviously the second is to have the rules lifted in a way that allows us to have actual audience members in their seats. There's a complicated question around, can you economically produce and stage a production with some kind of social distancing, and you know, as you'd expect, it's very complicated for an art form like ours to do that. But I think if the rules are lifted, there'd be some portion of our patrons, consistent with Nik's data, who would be reticent about coming back. But particularly with some lead time as we work our way to November, if we're lucky enough to be in that scenario, I personally feel highly confident that there's a lot of pent-up demand, and there'd be enough people willing to come back to allow us to do some exciting things. Whether or not it's the same thing we would otherwise be doing, I think, is an open question. But certainly our experience has been that there's an awful lot of people out there who have now gone a long time without, as Nik called it, their fix. And I think the demand will grow as this period extends.
Thank you. Very interesting, and it sounds like you know, there's opportunity to look at programming as well, and scaling back programming if that needs to happen, just as a reality as part of this. But obviously, all of that is not easy at all. Steve Bellamy, CEO of the Confederation Center for the Arts and PEI. I know you've spent some time thinking about this, and you've done some surveys as well. Could you just share your comments on this?
Sure. So like Camilla, we're in a region of the country that has been, at least for the moment, is relatively unaffected. We actually have 0 active cases of COVID now, and it's been that way for quite some time. PEI is in the process of opening up, and businesses and restaurants have actually opened with limitations of 50 patrons. So, and I would suggest too that we watch jurisdictions that open early to see about behavior. The results of this survey have been immensely helpful. We have done a similar poll locally, and we're just getting those results in now, but they're equally optimistic. A good portion of people are really eager to get right back into arts activities and attend things. For those who don't know, the Confed Center, we have 3 divisions. There's a large art gallery, a theater division, and then we do arts education programs. So we're certainly approaching each of those differently. Our art gallery and our arts education programs are actually opening up this week. So the art gallery, we've been working very closely with the province and the Chief Public Health Office in terms of what's needed, capacity limitations, certainly sanitization and having equipment available for the public and so on. So we're glad that our art gallery is going to be able to open at the end of the week. On our arts education programs, it's been a matter of drastically reducing class sizes and only running those visual arts and performance arts classes where people can be socially distanced. The provincial regulations right now allow up to 15 people in one room. So we're following those guidelines and building that out. But as both Camilla and Cornell mentioned, on the theater and performing arts side and dance and music concerts in our case, I mean, we're optimistic that people want to return. The issue we're having is really around the rules and around what is safe as has been mentioned, for our actors and for musicians. I will say that the opportunity that's come up recently is for us to collaborate with other businesses in the community, other organizations, in talking to government about the long-term strategies that are going to be required. As has been mentioned, you know, there are some things we just can't do with these physical distancing measures. And we would love to explore the use of limited group testing, for example. We're having those conversations where could we take a band of 5 musicians or a cast of 12 people and a crew of 8 and have them tested on a bi-weekly basis so that in a bubble they can work together without social distancing. And we're trying to explore some of those conversations right now. Otherwise, it's really what's been mentioned, trying to determine how to make our audiences feel safe and come back. I would note what Nik said is really significant about these particular results is that high number of people that are still uncertain. And we're seeing the same thing here and agree that as things unfold, that group will tend to lean towards venturing out rather than lean towards waiting. So that's where we're at.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And now, Kenji Maida and Frédéric Julien, you know, as executive directors of associations where you're talking to members all the time and hearing from them, I'm curious to know your thoughts on how you think some of our smaller and mid-sized arts organizations might fare in terms of their ability to be a little bit more nimble in opening up. I think that's some of the theory and dialogue we're hearing out there today. Do you think it will be easier to adapt for smaller and mid-sized arts organizations? Kenji, I'm going to start with you, and maybe you can share your thoughts.
Sure, and in the context of BC having single-digit or low double-digit numbers of cases every day is kind of what we're also looking at here. Certainly, very similar questions and a similar I would echo what's already been said around larger institutions, that smaller institutions, smaller organizations are also thinking about that. One of the key things that we're hearing in BC, we did some data collection around the differences between facility-based organizations and non-facility-based organizations. And of course, clearly, the facility organizations are more concerned. They have higher overhead. And you know, some of the smaller organizations, especially the ones that have maybe less than 100-seat venues, it's this conundrum a little bit, because as you have a smaller venue, then you can have a smaller number of people inside the space in order to ensure physical distancing is in place. In BC, we have currently a 50-person limit for mass gatherings. So if you have a 100-seat venue, you can't fit 50 people in there. You can maybe fit in 20 people to ensure the physical distancing. So the same questions around, is it financially feasible in order to put on a show? And so a number of organizations are thinking about what does it look like to do micro performances in those smaller spaces, and for possibly the digital or live streaming kind of to complement that as well. And as we start to look at larger venues, and even there's an organization here that has a 300-seat venue, and they said that if they had physical distancing, it would be about 70 to 100 people max. And so those are things that definitely they're thinking about around what does that look like for them. Because the larger you get, if you go above 300, the overhead cost doesn't, as we recognize this, it becomes harder and harder to produce any show. And how can you do a micro performance of a small show on a large stage? And does that actually fit within the framework of a 1,000-seat venue to have a small performance, because it can feel cavernous. So again, those questions around what does the audience experience look like are part of the larger conversation that's happening in BC.
Very interesting, and we've seen those images coming out of certain halls, you know, across the world, where they've physically taken out the seats to give you a sense of what it would feel like. And you do worry that the audiences are going to, you know, feel they'll feel unusual. But again, we weren't used to, wearing masks and lining up for grocery stores and that sort of thing. So maybe this is part of that just new normal we're starting to try to normalize in some way. Frédéric, Julien, are you hearing similar things from your stakeholders? And what else would you like to add or comment on this front?
Yeah, like Kenji, we've been hearing similar stories. And at normal time, a performing arts venue is an asset. In these unprecedented, I've got it, circumstances, they are more of a liability. It's a very rigid structure that you're stuck with. Like you can't really change the flow of audience members. You can control it, but in many ways, you're stuck with the structure. So organizers that don't have a venue to operate, they feel less pressure from the overheads cost. And also they find themselves more nimble, and they can consider a greater variety of options for creative ways of engaging with the audience in the reopening and recovery phase. I'd like to speak to what Kenji said as well on the user experience. If we go back to an earlier Business for the Arts research called Culture Track Canada, we learned in this survey that one of the most important driver of frequent attendance is feeling welcome. How can people feel welcome if the ushers greeting them are wearing masks? How does that change that notion of being welcome and also being part of a community, which is another important driver? So these are additional factors that arts organizations have to consider as they are laying out their reopening plans.
That's very, very interesting and thoughtful. And will audiences feel that sense of, the culture track study that you refer to? Canadians said that it was a sense of belonging and the feeling of, leaving that sense of loneliness that the arts provide. And so obviously there's a hunger to go back to the live arts. Some are more comfortable than others to do it. But how do you create that community bond that you speak to? So that's a very good point. Thinking longer term, and knowing Irfan, a very strategic thinker here and visionary, some might say, I'm going to start with you, but we think longer term, 1/3 of Canadians want to wait on average about 5 months after we open our doors, or when we're able to open our doors. And the majority of this group will only feel comfortable once there is a vaccine in place. Now, there's also a large segment of Canadians who are still unsure about going back to the live arts, and perhaps they're looking for guidance from our arts leaders on how to do that. Now, given we don't know for certain when a vaccine or if a vaccine will be in place, are we prepared to adapt to the notion that this could be our new normal for quite a long time? What are the challenges here? Some of them are quite obvious. And what are the opportunities, though, that you see in as we look for a path forward? So, Irfan, what do you think?
Thanks for the easy question, Nichole.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here, and Nik, thank you for the fantastic work. It's super important for us to have data as we think about where we're going and taking the sector as a community together forward. The question of not knowing when we're going to have a vaccine is a really difficult one, right? We could be in this new normal for months, we could be there for years. And so for those of us in leadership positions, I think it's prudent for us to think about this as being a potential multi-year scenario. And how would we actually survive this and ensure that we're relevant through all of that? And if we can do that, then if it comes back earlier, then we know that we're comfortable probably in either of those situations. It's easy for us to go to a place of loss on this. It's easy to think about how things used to be. And I think the way we're going to get through this is by actually changing our mindset and going to a place of opportunity. And so let me speak a little bit more about that. I mean, historically, we would look at things, I would say, from an incremental perspective. Can we get more people to come to this year's show than we had last year? And if we had 5% more, that was a real win. I think this is forcing us to think about things completely differently. Like, we can't be incremental anymore in our approach. What that allows us to do, though, is think about game-changing things. And one thing that I think is a game changer for us is, at Glumbo Museum, we're in Calgary. Historically, we could never put the Metropolitan Museum in New York in our competitor set. I mean, they were in New York and there was 10 million people. And fundamentally now, the citizens of Calgary or of Alberta or of Western Canada, they aren't our audience. The world is our audience. And so the opportunity for us to have a step change in relevance now exists. I'll give you another example that I think about, which is it fundamentally now changes how we think about our mission and what it is we do to actually engage with our community. You know, at Glenbow, we take history, visual art, contemporary and historical, and we use that to catalyze important conversations that we think need to happen for society so that we can make our community better. Historically, we thought that had to have a building, but when you think about what our true core mission is, that doesn't require a physical space. And you know, the last layer that I think about is interactivity. Museums for a long time have thought about how do we have not one-way conversations, but two-way conversations. And I would argue that at least for us, we were doing that, you know, kind of with mixed results at best. But this new situation has forced us to open up alternate channels that have in fact allowed us to do the things that we've always aspired to do even better. And an example that I love that our team came up with, you know, in addition to doing Glenbow at Home, which is sort of virtual programming, you know, I try to do that by putting visual art up behind me and rotating it. So I sort of have Glenbow at Home all the time here for anyone that I'm on a Zoom call with. The team created an initiative called Dear Glenbow. And Dear Glenbow has asked our community members to write letters to us explaining how they and their families are sort of managing through this historic time. That has created a level of conversation and interactivity that we could have only dreamed of a year ago. And if we weren't forced to be creative, we probably wouldn't have ever come up with it. We couldn't have done that a year ago. If we asked people to write us letters when they come visit us, it wouldn't feel real or relevant. But now they're actually engaging in a way that we've always hoped they would engage. And you know, that experience for them, most people aren't collected in a major art museum anywhere. And here our community has an opportunity to be part of a collection and to be part of upcoming shows. And I think that connection to us, because of this and because of the situation that we're in, creates a massive opportunity. Because that bond that we have now created that otherwise wasn't available to us, I think will last post whenever this sort of comes back to where we were. And so I think that the team has done a really good job of changing its mindset and moving from crisis to opportunity, from incrementalism to step change results.
I think that's very interesting and a very good observation as we feel that we are bonding, to use your word, more closely with our communities. We get a sense of how people are feeling. And of course, given the times that we are in now, is this ever more important than ever that we are responsive and think carefully about you know, how we can be helpful and responsive. Anita Gaffney, I'm going to also ask you to think longer term. You know, if people are going to wait, even if we're able to open our doors and welcome people in, but they're going to wait 5 months, and some of them really want to wait for a vaccine, and we don't know when that's going to happen. What are the implications for you as the executive director of the Stratford Festival, one of our largest in Canada?
Well, I think in the immediate term, we're all concerned about survival. I look at everyone who's on this call. I think we're all trying to survive to fight another day, and dealing with all the impacts. And you know, this has been insidious for our industry. You know, gathering, as Camilla had said, is absolutely fundamental to the arts. Our artists gather, our musicians gather, our audiences gather. This has upended the industry. And it is an opportunity, but I think we all have to recognize that it is about survival as well. And just managing through this time so that we can keep our people with us, to stay connected to our audiences, so that we're there for the future when they're ready to come back. At the same time, you know, I was in panic mode for the first 2 months. I don't know about the rest of you. And now I'm turning to a point of, I need to embrace this renewal. it is forcing us to rethink everything about, certainly for the Stratford Festival, that's the only thing I can talk about with any authority. So it's making me think about who the audience is. You know, our audiences come from across North America. No one is traveling from across North America in the next 2 years, I'm going to say. You know, what is the artists? You know, we have 120 artists in our company, and they're in 3 different plays. So there's all that cross-pollination and all the things that you don't want when you have a virulent disease. So what do we think about our programming at Stratford? We're a repertory company, so all of our plays play simultaneously. So we have to think about, what does the programming look like? What does the artist composition look like? What does the funding model look like? If you can only sell 1/3 of your house, we are going to have to look to government to provide more support to the arts to help round out that variance. We're going to need the help of donors. We're going to have to rethink what pricing looks like. And I haven't even got to what the venues look like and the expense associated with making your venue suitable and safe and comfortable for people. Camilla touched on labor contracts and you know, how can we all work together as we recognize this new reality? Is there opportunities to be touring work and we're looking at smaller works and taking it elsewhere and giving audiences the opportunity to see the work? So it's, you know, it's some moments I can say this is a really terrible time to be an arts leader. And then another moment I can say, this is a really exciting time to be an arts leader. And maybe you've caught me on the latter day. And, you know, I think it's really, I think it's a great opportunity for some renewal and really rethinking. I don't know if all of you got the chance to watch the Black Like Me session that the festival ran on the weekend, that the artists ran on the weekend rather, and that we amplified. You know, I don't know that we would have had that conversation without this pause. And I guess maybe that's why I'm in the embracing and thinking that being an arts leader is a great thing today, because I think as long as we can survive, I think some amazing things can happen in the next year or 2. Thus ends the sermon.
No, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone is in this mode of listening and thinking about how we can be responsive to what's going on, and that it's very important. And as you talk about Canadians engaging, and we see through the report that Canadians are engaging in a very fundamental way with arts organizations, that it does present an opportunity. And let's hope that our patrons, you know, Cornell was mentioning that patrons of the ballet have been uber generous given all of this, that there is empathy within the private sector and the public sector for just the difficulties and the challenges of staying alive through this very difficult time. Frédéric Julien, I know, je sais que vos membres vous discutent beaucoup, les défis ici, mais aussi les opportunités. What are your thoughts as we think longer term about the implications of people wanting to wait and see?
Well, you said it. It's about time. And time can change a situation very quickly. So we saw in the Arts Response Tracking Survey that there's a lot of uncertainty about when people might be ready to return. Looking back at another omnibus survey, this one fielded in Quebec by Léger in late April, it found that 30% would return in less than a month. And of those, 8% would return immediately and 20% after a few weeks. Comparatively, the Arts Response Tracking Survey found that 44% of Quebecers were ready to come back immediately. And we're talking about a difference of not even a month. So the wonderful news is that this is meant to be an ongoing tracking survey, and we could well see entirely radically different answers in the next iteration of the survey. Other positive news, again from Quebec, I don't mean to always differ from Quebec, but some of their surveys have been quite nice. The Habbo Entertainment Barometer, it's a tracking survey as well, and they had 2 rounds already, one in April, one in May. And they noticed that in May, the feeling of deprivation was exacerbated. So the percentage of people who reported that they were missing entertainment activities a lot increases by 2 to 5 percentage points for most activities. Festivals and concerts were among those that were missed the most. The level of concern that people were expressing about these activities, about engaging in those activities, decreased also quite significantly over this 1 month period. So one would have hoped that their time to return answers would have also been shorter. Unfortunately, they were not quite as short. However, this one survey did not have an immediate return answer option like the survey designed by Nik had. And I'm pretty sure that this was a very good instrument to capture the eagerness of a fringe of the audience to return to the performing arts. So these are just a couple insights. I could go on forever, but I'll leave it at that.
That's very interesting. And you know, this is a tracking study, and we'll be very interested to see how the needle has moved, for example, with the unsure population, and we'll have those findings for everybody in about 6 weeks with the report. But it will be interesting to see as governments communicate a level of more confidence in opening for opening doors to various businesses and arts organizations, if people are prepared to take a bit more risk and move the needle there. Now, my last question anyway is around the digital, and I think, you know, a lot of us sort of, we were talking before this sort of official call, and how, you know, it's great to see that half of Canadian culture goers have turned to digital cultural experiences during COVID. And notably that 9 in 10 culture goers are willing to pay for at least part of the ticket price to see cultural performances that they would normally see in person. Now, Kenji, does this surprise you, given what you're hearing from your members? And do you feel this is a short-term, long-term opportunity?
It doesn't surprise me. I love that question was in there. So thank you, Nik, for that. Certainly, when I was canvassing some of the arts and culture organizations in BC around, who have done some surveys as well, one organization said that 80% are willing to pay for digital content up to around the $20 mark for their live performance. I also saw, just in terms of people paying a premium, even when they return to go back into spaces. One organization reported 77% said they would pay more to be in the space when they return. So that these are things that are, I think, really heartening to see, that people are able and willing to contribute that way. That being said, I also think that it really depends on what type of content it is, and how much we're asking them to pay. I also really appreciate that Nik's survey includes what is the percentage breakdown that people are willing to pay. I do wonder if patrons are more inclined to pay for digital content right now as a way to indicate their support of the arts and culture community broadly during the pandemic, knowing that arts and culture is highly impacted, and people are trying to strive for being entertaining their family, and being able to have a bit of normalcy with some of this digital content. But most organizations don't have the capacity or technology to create high quality streamings or recordings. And so I wonder if the shift to digital content will just be a very quick temporary thing. Our current survey that we're doing here in BC, preliminary result is that organizations, 34% feel like they don't have the knowledge to go digital, and 43% feel like they don't have the necessary equipment or technology. So if this is a long-term strategy, then how can we ensure that the expectations of improved production value, meaning better audio, better video, and better experience digitally, can be maintained by these live performing arts organizations in particular, when that is not their main core of their work. And so if that doesn't increase, if the quality doesn't increase, then I suspect that audiences are going to be fatigued by the more general Zoom-like performances, or however we want to call it, and drop out in terms of whether they would pay for it and their level of engagement. So those are things that I'm thinking about.
That's interesting, and it'll be interesting and important for arts leaders to understand whether or not they should invest in digital. You know, if it is just a short term or long term. I'm thinking about our leaders on the call here who are running larger institutions and perhaps with bigger budgets and what opportunity that presents. But maybe Steve, Anita, and Camilla, we'll hear from you, and maybe starting with Steve Bellamy with the Confederation Center for the Arts, and what your thoughts are there.
Sure, thank you, Nichole. We have been really trying to look at digital, and I'm seeing some of the comments in the chat referring to digital not having to be just an either or thing in terms of either digital or live, and we're certainly trying to take that view. As Irfan and Anita have both said, you know, looking at the opportunities for innovation here and the silver linings in this situation. We very quickly put together out of our gallery an art classes from home series that's online. It's still growing and the uptake has been very good. We've done a random set of promotional videos, but we're still in the planning phase for our live online and digital concert series. But I will say they're not exclusively digital or online. We're trying to combine both things with the idea that as things open up, we want to certainly be ready with any production to invite a live audience into it. So as we're planning, say, a digital event in August, we're planning it so that it will be in our theater. It will be online and broadcast, but we will be able to bring as many people in as we're allowed to at that time. So trying to be a bit future ready in terms of those hybrid types of programs. The other thing we're doing, and this goes beyond digital a little bit, but on the innovation front, is looking at outdoors. It's very clear from health that the outdoors are safer than indoors, and we see some of that in the survey that Nik provided. And so while we don't really have an outdoor facility, we've partnered with an organization here that puts on the Cavendish Beach Music Festival. It's a space that fits 40 or 50,000 people outdoors, and we're actually looking at mounting one of our plays there in August or September in partnership with them. And working with government on the regulations to do it. We're partnering with a drive-in movie theater to have drive-in orchestra concerts here, where people can drive up in their cars and the orchestra will be live, but broadcast on FM radio. So trying to do, I guess, innovative things to keep people engaged, but we're definitely looking at this as a long-term situation, and we need to take what was our long-term digital strategy and accelerate it. The final point I'll make on that is it's also giving us an opportunity to really reset and look at some of the other gaps and priorities we had as an organization. Certainly recent events have reminded us about our level of diversity and inclusiveness and awareness. And we're looking at being able to reset and rebuild and learn in those ways and try to take advantage of this opportunity we have where we're forced to slow down in what we do and really build ourselves. Rather than get back to normal, we want to get back to better, which I think is a common theme we're seeing across organizations.
Very interesting. And the note about, is there a hybrid opportunity here between digital and the live experience? And can we talk about the outdoor experience being a little bit more comfortable, especially this summer, as we think about the opportunities here? Anita, what have you experienced in terms of your digital offerings? Obviously, you've been very active on that front.
Yeah, just to build on what Steve said, I think that as we come out of this and over the next couple of years, I think that digital and the in-person experience are going to dovetail. We have done a free film festival starting April 23rd. We're about halfway through it. So once a week, we screen one of the films we have in our catalog, which we are incredibly lucky to have that catalog of beautiful films. But we've built a whole series of bonus content around the films. So in a week, there's things that riff on the film. It could be the artists that are in it, but it could also be the themes that the film's dealing with. And we have a live Meet the Festival session on Saturday mornings. And we've had over 300,000 people join us for these films. People from all over the world. The comments that we get, it's people from from all points, and we have people saying, I'm just down the street and I miss Stratford, and people from around the world saying, what is the Shakespeare Festival? Where is it located? And wanting to know more about it. So that's been a positive. It's a free film festival, so we're not earning any money out of it, but it is giving us a sense of the appetite. And so we're now really looking at how to monetize the content, and looking, of course, to other industries and other comparators. The National Theatre is always ahead of us on this in the UK, and the Old Vic is doing some interesting stuff. So we're looking at their models and looking at all ways that we can monetize through advertising, donations, subscriptions, any ways that we can charge for the content that we're creating, which has real value, as you all know. There's artists behind this, there's thinkers and writers behind this, and we want to find a way to be able to continue to do this and to find a way to pay for it so that we can compensate everyone who's involved in these projects, which we have to date, I should clarify, but just to think about the future. And I do have to always keep this tempered of the time we're in right now. Like, we all are trapped in our homes. So I am cognizant that, we have to watch this, because like every Thursday night, I'm at my TV waiting for the Stratford Festival film. In 12 weeks from now, I don't know where people are going to be at in their life outside of their homes. So I think we have to temper what's happening in the environment. But I see our audiences coming back slowly. And so I see digital as a way to really complement and to stay connected to those people. And maybe people who would make a shorter visit to Stratford, and they'll pick up some other content digitally.
Interesting. Camilla, what has been your experience so far with digital? What's your take on this? And have you looked at monetizing content in that way? And do you intend to?
Thanks. I think I realize how massively inconsistent I am on this question, because I find myself both bemoaning the extraordinary amount of content that is free right now, and also feeling like it's a democratic privilege that we should be providing information, this content for free. So I'm really on the fence about how this is going to affect our business. On a very practical basis, MTC, like many theaters across the country, has not had a well of digital content to present forward. So I think we're all desperately jealous of the Stratford Festival's forethought in creating that content. There's also a gap in that there's this sort of we're not television stations, and we don't have a ton of expertise in being television stations. And so, it's not necessarily enough, if we think about digital content, to take the play that we were going to do, find a way to make it available on screen. And I think that we're really going to have to rethink our relationship with audience members and with the work that we want to do as we walk down that path. And I think most arts organizations are starting to walk down that path in a significant way. I have to also shout out, the most successful digital engagement we've done during this time has been the brainchild of artistic director Kelly Thornton, who launched a news magazine called Backstage in the Peg. And that's been done through YouTube and through Facebook. And we've just launched the 3rd episode, and we're really thrilled that, thanks to the data capture tools behind Facebook, we know that a younger audience is watching those episodes than would be necessarily in our building on a regular basis. It's not a two-way communication method. And I think that's one of the real challenges around digital, is it's a lot of spray and pray. And I was really interested to read about the Canada Performs data that was in the Globe and Mail, you know, about the watching, but also about the length of time that people are engaging. Because I'm going to be honest and say I am not up for Zoom at the end of the day of Zooming. So I think there's this piece. We're even looking at this news magazine that's 20 minutes long and wondering if in the fall, do we sort of repackage it into something more bite-sized? And it's a little terrifying to think that people's attention span is diminishing even further. But I think that in the two-way engagement is so much a part of what we do, in that we are sitting together, we are experiencing the audience around us, we are experiencing the actors live, and they can hear us breathe and we can hear them breathe. And that's a really intrinsic part of our art form, and it's diminished entirely by the screen component. So I think, you know, have I figured out how to monetize digital content? No. Has anybody? Not sure. But I think the bigger piece will be, what do we want to do what do we want to do that's also going to remind people to come back into our venues? And what's going to remind people that there is a different experience they can have sitting shoulder to shoulder with people? There's this extraordinary study that came out a number of years ago that an audience's heartbeats actually sync up. And I got to tell you, I'm not feeling any of that when I'm engaging digitally. But that real sense of being in a crowd that laughs, or being in a crowd that's shocked, or being in a crowd that's silent because they've just been blown away by something and it's shaking them to their core, is it's pretty fundamental to what we do. And I want to make sure that we find a way to make sure that's still viable at the end of this.
Well, that was very beautifully said. Thank you, Camilla. I think we've seen that the arts have resonate with people at a fundamental level. I mean, I think a lot of what we've seen in social media since COVID hit has been people singing from their balconies and playing guitar and keeping people motivated to feel positive and optimistic through the arts. And it certainly touches people to their core, and we have seen that played out. The live experience is really important. You know, Cornell and Irfan, you are chairs of boards of major institutions in Canada, and I know, and listening to bring a lot of chairs together from across the country, both of you have talked about the endless scenario planning that has gone on, looking at best case, worst case scenarios, and as we inch towards more worst case scenarios, you know, in some ways, when we think about the timeline that we're facing, and not really knowing when this might end, or what that looks like. As you think about digital, and we're doing a lot of number crunching, of course, at the board level as well. And you think of the opportunities financially around digital, does that excite you? Also, in terms of digital, I'm interested to know if you've seen an uptick in interest in your organizations because of that digital outreach, and because arts organizations have turned to digital to be more proactive in engaging with community, to ensure that, you know, they stay with your organizations through the longer run of this. And then the final part of this question is, you know, do you see this as a short-term strategy or a longer-term strategy, or that hybrid experience that we've just been talking about? So I'm going to start with you, Cornell. Not an easy answer to any of this, but what are your thoughts? But you're on mute. We just have to unmute. There we go. Yeah.
Thanks, Nichole. I'd make two observations.
Just give away the secret on mute. You got to pay for that.
Exactly. 25 cents, please. I'd make two observations. Firstly, I've been amazed at how the crisis has accelerated the development and deployment of a kind of near-term digital strategy. Certainly in our organization, I've seen incredible efforts made to use technology to bridge from here to normality, whether it's, you know, I've seen it, people talk about it in terms of the classes that'll be run for dancers in the near term. We've certainly been, as a board, meeting virtually and much more regularly, and frankly with a higher level of engagement than we might, ironically, sitting in the same room. So I think there's been a tremendous amount in the near term. And of course, all of this was possible before, but we hadn't been forced to do it. And so having been forced to do it and having learned to do it, I think it's going to be a bigger part of the world going forward. I know in our case, in terms of the long-term digital strategy, our executive director, Barry Houston, who's constantly focused on innovation, has been working on an ambitious digital strategy. I certainly, from our experience over the last few months, we've seen the role it can play as an extender of the experience. And so engaging with donors, engaging with audience, making the art form available to the public. We've seen it in that regard. I thought Nik's data was really interesting in that it showed people are willing to pay something. And so I think it's incumbent on every organization to figure out how to leverage what they can. And I don't think this challenge is really any different than what we've seen in other industries, whether it's the newspaper industry or the music industry. We've got to figure out how to monetize, and there are a variety of ways to do it. Is it going to replace, for a performing arts company, the box office? I don't think so, at least not in the near term. But can you use it at the margins to basically continue relationships with audience members who can no longer attend a performance in person? Can you get your artists to engage and collaborate with you to basically allow for the art to be shared on a more liberal basis? I think so. And can you use it? Can you build kind of curated content that you could, sell at a particular price point for different audiences? I think experience would tell us the answer to all those is yes. But I think from my perspective, the key is that we should all be thinking about how to make sure that our respective organizations emerge on the other side of this crisis basically better and stronger than they were before. And I would have thought digital is an integral part of it, and it will require some investment. And so we'll need to look to our support base to actually fund the development of the actual architecture to be able to deliver good virtual content, not, the stuff that's come out in the last few months is of necessity in many respects, kind of, people doing stuff they can do with the resources they have, but you've got to invest in a way that makes it viable as a long-term proposition. And you've got to get all the buy-in from all the different stakeholders who I think haven't necessarily seen it as a necessary part of the strategy. And so I think there's a big challenge here for arts organizations, but also a tremendous opportunity.
Very interesting. And Irfan, what are your thoughts on the digital opportunity?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Cornell said, and I know that people want us to get to the questions they've been asking, so I'll try to keep my answer as short as possible. I don't see us sort of being digital now and then not digital later, right? Like it's not an either-or thing. We've started to do things a little bit differently. Like 12 weeks ago, I didn't use Zoom, and we're now ordering groceries online and doing things differently. I think that we'll continue to actually now do both, which I think it's an excellent thing for us. I think that's a really positive thing, and that we're going to be more ubiquitous. People have allowed us into their homes now in a different way, and I don't think we should give up that ground. And so I see us using this as a tool to be sort of more present at more times and more relevant in people's lives. And so this is, in some ways, I think we can look back 5 years from now and be like, this was an exceptional time for us as a sector, because we got to do things that we otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to do. So let's not give that up. One of the questions that you had, Nichole, and you hear it either directly or indirectly in all of our comments. We're all thinking about the finances, right? And so how does this actually going to work? And how do we make the economics of digital work or not? And I think this is really, at least for me, made us think about the business model just broadly for our sector. And let me be super clear. It's not like the old business model worked. And I'm hearkening for the days of begging for funding and living hand to mouth. It's not like I'm like, that was fantastic, because it wasn't fantastic. But this has sort of forced us to think about things differently. And there's really two audiences I think about that I think are thinking differently: our patrons, our guests, and government. I think we're all thinking about the society that we want to build. I think government's thinking about that a lot right now. And I think our guests or our patrons are thinking about what matters to them. We're throwing away the things in our lives that don't matter. We're spending more time with family. We're really thinking about what truly is important, which is, I think, a really great thing. And as I think about talking to our patrons as a sector, I think we have to ask them the question: when you buy a ticket to come to a live performance, are you buying the ticket for the edification of the performance alone, or are you also buying the ticket because you believe that this institution's important, has an important role to play in society? The conversations that it instigates are necessary conversations. Because if you can have that conversation, I think people will support us and have a different discussion with us on philanthropy than maybe we were able to do before. I think that this has created an opportunity to change the mindset of our supporters. And then the second thing for government, one thing I just can't shake right now, we've effectively created a universal basic income in Canada right now, which I think is a fantastic thing personally. And that's a political comment maybe, but in the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, we've created this universal basic income. And the thing I can't shake is that we are paying people twice as much to sit at home and not work as we paid artists to work full time. That just doesn't make any sense. And at some level, is that the society that we're trying to build? So if we're having this conversation about basic income, I think that we have to, as a society, think about where we're going, and it allows us to sort of think about the thing we're trying to architect. And so, again, I think this is an opportunity for us to change the channel, shift the conversation, and both with our guests and government to say, like, what is the role of the arts, and why does it really matter?
Very, very interesting, and I think you've touched on some pretty important points. And this is an opportunity, absolutely, for the art sector to be innovative. And I see so much creativity coming out of our arts organizations right across the country. And I myself have enjoyed watching, the dancers from the National Ballet, for example, dance from their homes, and I just meet them in new ways. And I feel like I personally have bonded more with our artists in Canada. And I think ultimately, a lot of you have touched upon the reason we want to keep our arts organizations steady and strong is because our arts organizations are the homes of our artists, and we care deeply about our artists. And they are, as I said before, it's the arts that we've been turning to through all of this. And I think we can't lose that as a private sector or public sector. So it was wonderful to hear all of your comments. Thank you very much. And now we have an opportunity. It's 2:19, so we have until 2:30 officially. We have an opportunity to hear from our audience. Karan, I wonder if you are there. You are. I wonder how we're doing with this whole idea we had. So Karan is our creative director at Business in the Arts, and this was his idea. So I said, if this doesn't work, I'm going to make that your responsibility. But anyway, how are we doing?
We're doing pretty well. We have top 3 questions, and people have been voting. There's actually a 2-way tie for position 2 and 3.
Great. So why don't we start with the first question?
Great. The first question is from Catherine Carlton, and she asked, were there significant variations in attitudes across the country, for example, in provinces that have been hit harder by the pandemic?
Nik, that sounds like a good question for you.
Yeah, I'll be short and snappy. So, Frederick talked about the province of Quebec. Quebec was a noticeable outlier on a lot of these things. And I think we have to think of the environment in terms of signals. Not necessarily what I'll say the intensity of the pandemic. And what I would hazard to say is if your local public health authority, if the premier of your province says that it is good to start to normalize things, people will accept that at face value. So listen to what your public health authorities say and take that as a signal as to when people can return. The other thing on a regional basis, we heard from Steve and we heard from Kenji. The other thing I'd like to say is that we are encouraging as many organizations as possible to do their own surveys through volunteers. We're not talking about hiring consultants, but to use the questions and to share the information across organizations because the sector is so diverse. And the other interesting thing, and I'll close off with this because there was a question related to gender and age and stuff like that. The one other interesting thing had to do with digital and age. Interestingly, culture goers that were over 55 years of age were more likely to report engaging in a digital experience, not younger ones, at least in our study. And what this means is that, for those patrons, for those culture goers, they're looking for a way to engage. And my last comment will just be, when we think of the digital experience, I think we should be generous It's not just a performance. You know, Camilla talked about a newsletter. We should be thinking about broader digital strategies just to stay connected and to keep our people engaged.
Fantastic, thank you, Nick. Corinne, did you say we had another question?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Were those who were a part of the survey asked about their potential frequency of attending, keep attending the same amount, or attending fewer events, or attending more frequently?
So question for you, and Nick, there's a little bit of feedback on your microphone, and I just wonder if...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll try this. No, they were not asked. Good idea. The other thing is we'll be looking through the chat and for ideas for the next wave. So have ideas for the next wave of survey, post them in here, and the team will take a look at that, but not in this go.
Terrific. And Corinne, is there one last one there?
Sure. We have one more from Kate Leeming, and the question is there anyone who can speak to right purchasing for digital performances? We've been contemplating doing Readers Theatre live online, but we don't know about the rights for performances, free of cost for watchers. They're a small community theater based in Medicine Hat, Alberta.
Go ahead, Camilla. I see you. Yeah.
Kate, I'm going to throw my email in the chat field, so maybe you can just email me separately about it, because I think the fourth question was a really important one that maybe we want to make sure we get to today. But the truth is you still need to ask for the rights, and you still need to find a way to compensate the artists for their work. And I think that's a really fundamental piece for all of the professional groups in the room, of course, but for community theater, I think there's probably some obligations. I'm just going to pop my email in the chat. And you can contact me separately about that. I know I was just scanning through the questions and noticed the next one was really, I think, an important one for us to end with.
Steve, you've unmuted. Did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say it's critical to get that set up before you just set up cameras and broadcast online. If you're in a small place, we're going through a play that we want to put online, but even the rights holders of the play no longer own the video rights to it because they sold them long ago. So it is something you do have to chase down and make sure you have in place.
Okay, great. Corinne, it sounds like we really need to ask that fourth question.
Yep, and here we go. It's from Jessica Guttridge. And how can we amplify marginalized voices and work to promote racial justice and decolonization in our cultural spaces at a time when our audiences will be even more concentrated on the traditional core who have experienced the least financial upheaval? How can we talk about coming together until we can come together equitably?
Very good question, a very important question. Irfan, I've seen you've unmuted.
I think this is the most important question. So I'm so glad that Camilla forced us to answer it, because I think we have to have this conversation as a community. And this gets back to like the business model, right? Like we can't be relying on people to just pay for their own access. We have to go to those that can afford it and say, you know, what are you actually paying for? You're paying for this institution to exist because the conversations here are important, irrespective of if you can pay for it or not. And we need to go to government and say, these are civil society institutions, right? This is an important part of what builds a country, right? It's not just government. It's not just the bureaucracy. It's not just the judiciary. It's about journalism and arts organizations that create the fabric and the pillars to build a strong society. And we have to have equal access to all of those things. And so for government and for those of us that can afford to pay for these things, we must, in my opinion, to create these public squares for these conversations. It's such an opportunity for us to have this mindset shift and channel shift.
Thank you. That's very well said. I think this is an important, very important question. Obviously, it is top of mind for all of us as we watch our Twitter feeds with absolute horror at the moment. I'm glad you've brought that question forward. Thank you. Steve, I noticed you've unmuted, and then we're going to have to close very soon with remarks from Christopher. Steve.
I just wanted to add that I think it's on that topic. It's really critical now that all of us as arts institutions, however big or small, we use this space we've been given. I mean, we've been given space right now. And in terms of having, you know, initially there was panic about this thing setting in, but now there is time to reset and to learn and to consult those communities that maybe haven't been consulted before and to do that work. So I'm really hopeful that that's what we're going to see a lot of.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, there's so much to talk about here, and obviously we've gone through a huge amount of reflection during this time. Christopher, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Christopher, would you like to just offer some closing remarks, and we'll adjourn for the next in about 6 weeks from now.
Good. Thank you very much, Nichole. I just want a few quick points. First of all, thank you to Nik Nanos, Business and the Arts. The absolutely brilliant input from the advisory panel and the response panel. I really want to thank everyone who spoke. I want to thank Christine Armstrong and Raji for their financial support. Also, Canadian Opera Company, significantly supported. Thank you. I guess for me, there was just so much brilliant content there. I wish I could just kind of capture it all permanently in my mind, but I think the tightest encapsulation of the two extremes came from Anita's words, which is on the one hand, some days it's survival and the other days it's embrace the opportunity. And I think both those realities are true. Hopefully we're all going to start having more days where we're thinking about embracing the opportunity. And I guess in closing, I would say that someone made the remark that it seems like we're communicating more, or we're commuting actually ironically more in this time of being isolated. And I think collaboration and working together to share best practices and to create a forward path that's sustainable would be a really great outcome. And I think that's partly what this survey is about, and what this conversation was about. So thanks to everybody.
Thanks to everybody for joining us. And as I say, we'll have another report out with Nik Nanos and your team. And we'll have another session like this in about 6 weeks from now. So thank you again to all of you for joining us. Très belle journée. Stay well, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.